This is Professor Mike Ventola from Sandhills Community College, bringing you Grass of the Week. Welcome to our Grass of the Week number 8. This is our final Grass of the Week for the cool season grasses. Next week you should have reviewed the difference between C3 and C4 grasses and be able to understand that as we go next week into Bermuda grass. But this week is going to be a little bit of history. I'm going to talk about 3 grasses that are not so important in North Carolina, but are very important from a historic perspective. We talked last time about creeping bentgrass, and that is probably the most widely used fine turf grass in the United States right now, but it didn't used to be that way. There used to be something called mixed bentgrass or South German bentgrass. It was a bunch of different bentgrasses that were brought over here in what we call a blend. And you can see from this picture, John Mascaro's picture from the 1950s, that there's many different grasses. You can see the different segregation, and this is something that we even see in old creeping bentgrass greens, but we used to see it even more when we had different bent grasses. And the original grasses that were brought to the United States were called South German mixed bent grasses, or German bent grasses, and it was seed raised in Europe, brought over here and planted on the first putting greens, and it was 75 to 80% colonial bentgrass. A little bit, 10 to 20% was velvet bentgrass, and we're going to have a nice talk with Ed Consolati, who's the golf course superintendent in Connecticut, who has velvet bentgrass greens to this day. So that's a little bit of a throwback to the history. And then only 1 to 5% was creeping, but it turned out that creeping did better in a lot of the environments here. And when Dr. Deutsch and a lot of the early plant breeders started looking at those grasses, they were able to select bentgrasses that did better. And we just so pulled from all the stuff today that we have the improved bentgrasses that George Thompson and I talked about last week originally came from this blend or mix or compilation of a lot of different seeds that were put out on the turf and looked at. And even the improved back in the 60s and 70s, Congressional in Toronto bentgrass were pulled from that. So that's a little bit of history, and that is something that has been on Turf Bowl questions before. So you should know a little bit of history to learn about the future. And what happened, here's a nice picture from the 60s. This is actually Dr. Reed Funk, who's one of the best plant breeders around. He's retired now, but he was one of my professors at Rutgers University. And these guys went out and they looked at the grasses, and they saw which looked better and which looked worse and which had better color and which didn't. And they took those and they took them to, Dr. Funk took them to New Jersey and planted them and all over at the 3 different research farms there and the 3 different biomes in Rutgers. And he grew them up and he planted them, did similar to what Dr. Frazier does today, and he selected the best ones. And this is how the grasses got better and better and got more resistant to disease and just improved. And one of the other masters of this was Dr. Deutsch, who was at Penn State, and he's the one that came up with all the A's in the G's, and actually came up with Penn Cross and Penn Links and all the pens. But a lot of that grass was selected from the South German, and then even the more improved stuff, the A's and the G's, were selected at Augusta. So under really fine mowing. So the conditions, as the conditions changed, as the grasses got better, we were able to maintain them at more severe hunting kite, more drastic conditions, and then that again selected for better grasses at that. So as we move forward, we're going to see grasses that are better able to survive under the conditions that we're maintaining them in. But looking back, you can see that these original grasses were not that uniform, and that's a putting surface that's probably today not acceptable. And this was in the 50s and 60s a reasonable putting grass green. So the first one we're going to talk about is Colonial Bentgrass. Colonial Bentgrass used to be called Agrostis tenuis, but we can cross that out. The plant guys like to change the names, and there's reasons for that, not things that we need to worry about, but to Agrostis capillaris. And this is a weakly rhizomatous grass. It is poor drought tolerant. It has been used in New England on putting greens, but it can't withstand much modern turf. And this is one that was originally the major component of the South German bentgrass, but no longer used very widely. It's sometimes called brown top. It can be confused with some other bents we're not going to talk about in this class, but highland bent, so stuff if you find it in the field, you really got to key it out carefully. There are some improved cultivars listed here. It is less it gets much less dollar spot than Agrostis palustris, so the creeping bents, and I'm going to show you a picture. So this is a place where some plant breeders, even Dr. Frazier, and the national test every year has some colonial bentgrasses in it, and as they improve these colonial bentgrasses, sometimes they look better and better, particularly in Raleigh, in an area where creeping bentgrass sees a lot of stress from dollar spot. If you're not spraying for dollar spot, the colonial bentgrasses are going to look a lot better. So everyone's like, wow, what's that grass? It looks so different. And I think there's something to be said for looking at it in the future. And it has a little bit better wear tolerance than the non-improved cultivars, but still not the most wear-tolerant grass. But in a research plot, there's not a lot of traffic. There's not 40,000 golfers coming across it every year. There's very few people walking on it, so it can get thatchy and not worn down. So sometimes it can look better in a test than it actually would look out in the field. I would not recommend planting this grass on any golf courses you're planning on building, but here we go. Without dollar spot help, you can see that down here the creeping bentgrass is in trouble. It's got dollar spot. The dollar spot here is coalesced and come together. It's almost completely killed it. Where we've got our colonial bentgrass, which in this test, if in the drive-by road test, you're going to see that the colonial bentgrass looks very, very good and is holding up. So again, that's without dollar spot fungicide, and as most of you know who work in the golf industry here, we're spraying for dollar spot pretty regularly on our creeping bentgrasses in the southeast. So one thing on your book in page 13, we have creeping bentgrass is not featured in the book, but we can key it out. We're going to see creeping bentgrass right here, or colonial bentgrass, excuse me, and we can follow along here and get to it. There's not a table on it, so your notes are going to be much more important on this for this grass. It has a rolled vernation. It has a short, not quite as long ligule as creeping bentgrass, but it is there and it is membranous, so they are similar. So you want to put those together. It has no auricle. Growth habits, it has both stolons and rhizomes. So the rhizomes, to me, are one of the key identification tools. If you take a cup cutter out to one of those plots and you take a cup on, we've done that for field days, you can see the rhizomes. And I think the rhizomes could be one of the strengths of this grass as we go to less and less water and lower maintenance. If we're required to spread less chemicals and we can put less water on, this colonial bentgrass may have an advantage in the future over creeping bentgrass. So you want to keep watching it, keep going to trials and looking at this grass. The sheath is round, split with overlap margins, no hairs. So again, not one of the major features, but good thing to know. Lighter green, and the grass is lighter green completely, but it is divided also. And I think that lighter green color might be something that'll trick you, because as the breeders work with it, they're going to make it greener. They always do. The blade 1 to 3 millimeters wide, flat with veins above, so that's a good way to identify that also. And then the seed head is a wide open panicum. So here's another little history thing about colonial bentgrass. We talked about our annual ryegrass seed. When we talked about ryegrass, this is annual ryegrass seed, and we talked about perennial ryegrass seed. we talked about the awn, and the awn being only on annual ryegrass, not on perennial ryegrass, and that was a way that to make sure you got the expensive seed, it was not with an awn. Well, it turns out that there's a similar mnemonic to remember on the bentgrass. This is creeping bentgrass seed, and it's very hard to see in this. And this is colonial bent seed. And it turns out that the colonial bentgrass seed has an awn, and the creeping bentgrass seed does not have an awn. So I was involved when I was at Michigan State, and a grad student, I was involved in some litigation where a group had bought seed from a less than reputable seed supplier, and they were trying to get a deal and get Pencross seed at a low cut rate without, I don't know, without seed tags. I don't know that much about it, but they ended up getting colonial bentgrass, and it didn't perform as well as they had thought it should, and they needed to prove that for a lawsuit to recoup some of their money. So I was charged with growing out, taking the grass that was on the greens there and growing it in the greenhouse to seed. And what we did is we grew that up, and then we proved that, or we showed from that seed that the seed had awns on it. So there was no way it could be creeping bentgrass seed because it did not have awns. So that's one little history story. So be careful. Seed identification can save you money, and these were not trained agronomists, and if they'd had a trained guy on growing at that golf course, they wouldn't have had that problem. So just an interesting note about what goes on sometimes in the industry, and to be careful, cover yourself, make sure you look at what you're getting and buying. So our next grass we're going to go into is redtop, and redtop is another one of the grasses that was originally in there, and it's a little open and not as much, but we can see that redtop has found a little bit of a new use at Oakmont Country Club. It's not a good grass for the shade, but since Oakmont removed all the trees, we can see there's this nice little bit of redtop bentgrass in the rough at Oakmont, and it adds nice color to that. Redtop is Agrostis alba, alba Latin for red. It has a pointed leaf tip. One of the unique things about this grass that makes it not such a good putting green grass, it has an annual root system. It can be perennial. Some of the plants will be annual, some of the plants will be perennial, but the root system is annual, so it's going to lose its root system every year. So that's just a recipe for disaster in the Carolinas. It has rhizomes, but no stolons, so again, it's not going to fill in as much as our Agrostis stoloniferous, and that can be a problem. So it's really not a putting green grass. It has been used in the past for overseeding, but there are better grasses for that. But the big use for it is, remember they had something called turf head, where you had, it was like a stocking covered sawdust, and it was in the shape of a head. There's a bald guy, and you added water to it, and the grass grew. Well, the grass that grew, because it grows really upright, you can see from this picture, was the redtop. So the seed in there was redtop, and it establishes quickly, almost as quickly as annual ryegrass. So that was beneficial also for a novelty, kind of like the chia pet, but they called it the turf head. And if anybody has a picture of that, I would love, or has had one of those, if I could get a picture of that for this Grass of the Week talk, I would really like that. I've had a couple of them, but it was a long time ago. So if anybody finds one, that would be a nice thing to help me out with. Okay, so redtop has a rolled vernation. The ligule is 2 to 5 millimeters, membranous, like all the bentgrasses. No auricle. Short rhizomes. So it's not going to form a dense sod. It's not going to be a good grass for that, but it will form short rhizomes. The sheath is round, split, and overlapped. The color is divided, and it's a little bit lighter green than the other color, but the grass is a darker green. It's not as light as the colonial. The blade is 3 to 5 millimeters wide, and it's scabrous. So scabrous is a nice vocabulary word for you. I might ask that on the quiz. It's a botanical word. For the guys that have plant materials, it's a DER word. It means it's rough along the edges and pubescent. And pubescent is it has slight hairs along the edge. So if you rub your finger along the edge of the leaf blade, it's going to be rough, and it's going to have little fringe of hairs, not long hairs, but tiny pubescent hair. So those are two vocabulary words. If you have trouble with those, look those up. You can Google them, or your DUR book will also help you with that. And then the main identifying feature that I have in red for you is the seed heads. There's copious flowering, there's a lot of flowers, and they're really, really red. And that is, here's a nice picture of Oakmont, and you can see the clumps of Redtop and how nice they look grown up in there. And remember, it looks like a low maintenance area, but it's not. These guys are in there. Look, they've got 2 spray hawks, and they're spraying out all of the weeds. The broadleaf weeds are going to come up in there because these are more open grasses with the fine fescues and then the Redtop and some of the bents. It's kind of mixed and has a nice windswept look, but there is some work involved. So what they do at Oakmont is they spray that. They got 3 guys out there spraying, and then they have 2 guys that come behind, and once the broadleaves start to die, they'll weed that out. So there is a little bit of work. They're trying to keep all the trees and woodies out of there. And you need to, again, you can't, this won't happen in shade, but it's, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful meadow, and it's a great habitat for wildlife, quail and other birds. So if you're into wildlife, this is a nice way to manage your golf course. So the next bentgrass, the final one we're going to talk about, and this is the grass that Ed is going to talk about. So he's more an expert than me. I'm not as familiar with velvet bentgrass as I am with the others, but Agrostis canina is the finest textured turf grass that we've got, and it will form very dense turf. So that I think is what that they want, and why in Connecticut, Ed's going to talk about that. It has very low heat tolerance, so it's not going to be a grass for the transition zone or the southern warm season, and it's not the best traffic tolerance. So Ed's going to talk about that a little bit. It's used in the Pacific Northwest and in New England. So Connecticut is about as far south as you're going to get. And it has some shade tolerance to it, so that's useful if you got a golf course with a lot of trees and they're not willing to cut them down. You can give this grass a try. And I think this is a grass that might come back into favor again as we start breeding and using different bent grasses. Here's a research plot from 1952. You can see very, very dense. Again, lighter green color, competing with some of the other bents. It's doing good. So if you come to a trial, if you can like that olive green color, it might work for you. Velvet bentgrass will have a rolled vernation. The ligule is 0.8 millimeters, so short and membranous, so shorter than the others. No auricle. None of the bentgrasses have an auricle. Growth habit's going to be creeping, scaly stolons. So then these stolons are going to form a tight, very dense turf. The sheath is round, split, overlapped. Collar is medium broad. Blade is less than 1 millimeter, so the finest bentgrass that we're going to have. And also a reddish panicum seed. So again, a little bit red, but not as red as the Redtop. And here's one of the old pictures of trying to control velvet bentgrass in the 50s. And one of the ways that they did that was with aggressive verticutting. And Ed's going to talk about that. He sees that also. He sees some damaging. So it is the thing that the management will be different than creeping bentgrass. You can't just rush in and use the same techniques. But it is something worth looking at. So when you go to field days, again, look at this grass, and you will see that on field days. And that's going to be it for my talk. I'm going to have a little talk with our guest, Ed Consolati. He's the golf course superintendent at Birchwood Country Club, a very good friend of George Thompson, and he will help you understand a little bit more about velvet bentgrass and the maintenance of that grass. I'm with Mr. Ed Consolati. He's the golf course superintendent at Birchwood Country Club in Connecticut. It's a 9-hole golf course that has velvet bentgrass. How you doing, Ed?
Very good, Mike.
Yeah, good to meet you. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was how do you identify this grass from regular bentgrass?
Well, the main characteristic of this grass is that it's so many leaf blades per square inch, probably triple the amount of a regular creeping bentgrass, and it's a lot finer. The blades are a lot finer. You can distinguish it quite easily from that area right there.
Yeah, now what areas do you think this grass should be used?
Basically, it's a northeastern grass. I think this our golf course here in southern Connecticut is probably the furthest south you're going to see it. It's basically, like I say, New England grass loves the cooler weather, and I'm the furthest south. From here down, you're not going to see it at all.
All right. Now, is your membership happy with this grass on your greens?
I would, well, just like any other membership, probably 95% of them are, and then you got the 5% of them that say we need a change, and you're going to get that probably no matter where you go.
That's good. I guess that's what George says. You get in trouble when the 51% want to change. So what areas do you think it would be a big mistake to attempt to use this grass?
Like I say, Mike, this is the farthest south you're going to see it, and that's I'm right here on the corner, about 50 miles east of New York City.
All right. Okay.
And I wouldn't. This is it.
So are you near the Parkway up there in Connecticut?
Absolutely. We're right off of 91.
Okay, 95. Yeah, that's a beautiful drive. If I've driven that a little bit when I was up there. So do you have any interesting story that's unique to velvet bentgrass?
Well, it's you want me to get into the maintenance part, or is that?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. As nitrogen, you know, we can get by probably between 2 and 3 pounds a year. Anything over that will lead to excessive thatch. And that's probably our main problem with the velvet, because, you know, the blades are so dense that's what we have to worry about. Now,
how often do you have to aerify?
Aerifying, we have to be very, very careful with aerifying. You know, you have, the reason we aerify, personally, velvet doesn't really like aerification. The reason why we're aerifying is to modify our soil. We're going with a 90-10, and we've been doing it for the last 10 years under the USGA specs.
I see.
This year we didn't do it because it's so slow healing that I can still see it recovering from last October. So this year we didn't do it at all.
Wow.
What we're doing instead is we're going on a thatching program and working in some light top dressing with a 90-10 to keep the thatch under control.
Now, are you verticutting or using something more aggressive like the grading?
The verticutting dethatching, that's the same tool, Mike.
So you've never tried the grading on it?
No, people have mentioned it, but we've had good luck with the wings on the Toro.
Yeah, the grading came into big favor here for a while, and then there were some bad mistakes, and then it kind of has gone out of favor. So that's an interesting thing.
But we've had good luck with the Toro, the rider.
Yeah. Now, where do you see this grass in the future? Do you see it being used more or less, or?
Well, you know. You're always going to get these golfers that, you know, when we come to, when there's a guest that comes down here, the greens might not be rolling 13 or 14 feet. They may be a little on a slow slide, but when they walk off the last green, they're saying, "Boy, we just played something different up here." And this is what gets them, and they're going to say, "Boy, these greens are nice."
Yeah, it's pretty neat, because I know you're not very far from that whole Westchester corridor where there's some really high dollar golf courses.
Absolutely.
What do you think on a budget in comparison to creeping bent? Do you think it's comparable, less, or more expensive to maintain?
I would say, Mike, probably about the same.
Okay.
I think you're, they're managing the other bents basically the same way now with your verticutting, top dressing. And we don't go as heavy as they do. We go a little on the light side. You may, even with the pounds of nitrogen per square feet, 2 and 3 pounds, I don't see too much difference.
Seems like it's
disease-wise, you're spraying every week anyway, and you do that, and you have it under control.
Yeah. Now, George said that Daconil is the foundation of your fungicide program. Are you using any heritage on that, or
no? Just Daconil, Mike. I've been using Daconil for 40 years, and that does the job on everything.
It's amazing that nothing's. I don't think there's going to be resistance developed to that, because it's been a pretty long time. So
it's a good tool.
Well, great to meet you, Ed. Thanks for answering my questions, and hope we help the students learn more about velvet bentgrass.
Okay, Mike. Anytime.
The Grass of the Week music is the Sand Hills Community College Jazz Band directed by Tim Haley.